We have lots to talk about in today's video, including the latest rumors around the league. Today's trade rumors focus on teams like the Montreal Canadiens, the Seattle Kraken, the Buffalo Sabres, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the New York Islanders. We have some other big news that it could be a 3-on-3 hockey tournament at the Olympics. We'll discuss how that could possibly work out. We have a signing with the Boston Bruins. David Pastrnak has responded and talked to the media about his benching in the last Bruins game, plus big news around the league regarding some injuries and activations, especially in Colorado, where they're starting to finally get healthy. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about here today. Let's first get started with news out of Boston. Actually, a couple of items regarding the Boston Bruins. But first up, they finally signed Tyler Johnson. We know Johnson went to training camp with the Boston Bruins on a professional tryout. It seemed like they were pretty pleased with him and looked like he would be a decent fit there. However, it took them some time to kind of navigate their salary cap and roster situation. They tried to be able to figure things out, so they've been able to do that now. And Johnson has signed a 1-year deal, a league minimum, for the remainder of this season. So obviously, Johnson comes with a lot of experience, should fit well into that group and the culture, and obviously has already been acclimated with the team for quite some time since going to camp. And like I said, he's never really left the team. He's been around, it just hasn't been officially signed. So that's officially on the books. Now, of course, as we mentioned in the last Bruins game, even though they won the game and they get another shutout because they've had back-to-back wins, and of course the second one against the Seattle Kraken there on the weekend, but David Pastrnak did not play in the third period. And when head coach Jim Montgomery was asked about it after the game, he indicated that was strictly just a coach's decision. There was nothing injury or anything related. And of course, like I said in that video, at the time I was watching multiple games going back and forth. I didn't see anything directly that made sense that I could definitely pinpoint as the reason why. But there was a bad turnover that Pastrnak had created. And, obviously the coach was sending a message. He's not afraid to do that, especially with those top guys. And we've heard him talk before about how, especially Brad Marchand, how they want to be held accountable. They hold each other accountable. And that all kind of goes into that, which has been there for a long time, that Bruins culture. And it's allowed that team to be successful. So obviously Pastrnak, speaking to the media today, did kind of talk about this. He acknowledged it and said that he created a bad turnover, and he just wants to move forward. He said he doesn't want to be a distraction to his team. The guys in the room know how he feels about them, and it's a bad play, and he takes accountability for it. So clearly, good on him. Like, it's the proper kind of response that you would expect. Marchand said the same thing. Of course, we had seen an incident, probably 10 days or 2 weeks ago now, when Montgomery was giving it to Marchand on the bench. And, of course, he was displeased with his play, made a mistake, expects better out of him. And, obviously Marchand didn't think anything of it. He screwed up, and he was getting an earful. That's what he expects. He's like, he said, obviously, in today's world, a lot of younger players in different generations might expect to be coached differently, but for him, that's what he's used to, and he's totally fine with it. And, obviously Pasternak's the same thing. We saw it in the playoffs when he was called out by his coach needing more. And what did he do? He came back and scored the series-clinching goal in Game 7. So clearly, Pasternak's another player who can handle this type of coaching, and obviously it's not something that he's opposed to. So they've done a great job at handling their adversity, I think. They've got some wins together now. And like I said yesterday, like, those wins were back-to-back. They were shutouts. Each goalie got one, so they're playing better. But, they weren't exactly a pretty perfect game. Like, they're not exactly, I'm sure the coach Montgomery can look at those games and still have lots of things he'd like to see done better. So the fact that they're finding ways to win when they're not even at their absolute best, and one of their top players is benched for a period, that tells me that it's a positive, very positive sign. The other teams in the Atlantic Division better be on notice, because if the Bruins get their stuff together and can keep this going, it's going to cause ripples here for the playoffs, especially for the bubble teams. Like, obviously right now Ottawa's kind of sitting in that bubble spot. By win percentage they are theoretically in like that fourth spot, but Obviously, they haven't played as many games, so they got to have the pressure on them to keep winning, or they'll fall down, right? So, and then you get Detroit and Buffalo want to get into the playoffs this year. We know that's a big push, but right now they're just a little bit behind. Detroit looks slightly better than Buffalo so far, so we'll see. But if the Bruins are winning, it's bad news for everybody else in that division, which has been a long time that's been the case. Now, some other injuries and roster move updates around the league. In Ottawa today, because some positive signs, both Artem Zub and Shane Pinto, who have been out for some time, both were full participants at practice. Artem Zub, recovering from a concussion, was able to get through the full practice as a full participant, so everything looked very positive there. Coach Travis Green, of course, when he spoke to the media afterwards, hadn't really had a chance to get an update from the trainers just yet, so we don't know the full status of Zub, but they play tomorrow night, and there's at least a good chance that he play, and if he doesn't somehow play in that game, I would think that he's going to probably play in the one after. Like, he's super close, which is very positive for them. Shane Pinto did not do the full practice, but he did do a big chunk of it. Green said that wasn't completely shocking for him. I think Pinto's getting closer to returning, but he's probably still a little bit further out. So I think we'll see Zub return to the lineup in Ottawa first, with Pinto following maybe a couple of games later. So we'll see, but either way, positive news. No updates on David Perron yet. We know he's still on a leave of absence from the team. He and his wife are dealing with a complex family emergency based on his wife was pregnant, ready to deliver, and they were running into a lot of complications. But we don't know. I don't know. What's the status is and where everything stands with that. We just want to keep them in our well wishes and hope things are progressing and that they're doing okay. And we'll wait when they're ready to make something public, which we don't know when that will be. We know that Phil Broberg, we got bad news and was injured in the last Blues game. Got an update on him that he's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. So, again, not great. I mean, obviously 4 to 6 weeks is a long time. It's a bunch of games, but based on how he went down, it could have been a lot worse. And it could have been, several months is what some people thought it could be because, it looked bad, right? So the fact that he's only 4 to 6 weeks seems like they might have dodged a worse injury that were feared. So as much as it's not great, it's not as bad as it could have been. So he's out 4 to 6. Big news in Colorado. Several updates there. Miles Woods officially moved to injured reserve. They recalled all the players they sent down to the Eagles the day before, so Ivan, Kovalenko, and Prisharov were all been recalled, and Val Nichushkin is now officially allowed to practice with the team, so he's not too far away from being able to be reinstated and play. Their record with him in the lineup in the last few years is crazy good, so getting him back will be a absolutely huge push. They just recently activated Arturi Lehkonen, so they're getting healthy there, so Lehkonen back. Nichushkin's close. Hopefully Duran can return here soon as well, and they can actually have a full and healthy top six. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Duran was at practice today too. So that's very, very, very positive. And again, teams in the Central Division, the fact that the Avalanche, they may not be in first place. I mean, I know Winnipeg and Minnesota had their phenomenal start, but the fact that the Avalanche are kind of hanging around, we're being nowhere near 100% healthy, and now that they're starting to get there, there'll certainly be a team to watch here over the next 4 to 6 weeks to see if they can really kind of propel themselves to a much better spot in the standings. Fairly big update on Thatcher Demko in Vancouver. We got an update out of Darren Dreger. Dreger saying that Demko is expected, because they've been taking their good old time. They preach patience with this. We know this is a weird, unusual injury, and it may not even be an injury that completely goes away. It's something that sounds like Demko is going to probably have to deal with, and they've been trying to figure out the best plan of attack so that he could manage it and not be worse, and be something that he can not really have to think about a whole lot, right? Because if it does, get flared up or whatever, it could be bad from what I've understood, because it's a rare, weird injury that we don't really know all the details on. But he is expected to start practicing with the team sometime later this week. So he's been on his own, working with the goalie coaches and kind of doing a lot of his work, kind of working his butt off to get back. And the fact that he's going to start practicing with the team is very positive. But again, it could still be a couple of weeks before he plays. Dreger said they're going to take their good old time, preach patience here, continue to do that, because they want to make sure that once he is back, that he can stay back, ideally, and hopefully not get hurt again. So some positive steps forward there for Thatcher Demko. and the Vancouver Canucks. Nick Ehlers of the Winnipeg Jets became the all-time leading scorer amongst Danish hockey players in the NHL. Of course, Ehlers has had a really good start to the NHL season. Now sits at 474 career points and is now the highest scorer player from Denmark. So that's big news for him. I know listening to him talk when he was given the news from the media after his last game, he's saying how cool it was for him to be in such great company, some of the other top Danish players that he's idolized growing up and had a chance to play with to some degree as well. That just an honor for him. He's obviously from a country that doesn't produce a ton of NHL talent. Certainly one of the I guess one of the top guys ever now at this point. I mean, to be the highest scorer is quite something. Like, you may not have as much competition as players that come out of Canada, the United States, or Sweden, but still it's still a very, very neat, cool accomplishment. He's had a great career, great start, and the way he's playing right now, you got to hope that for Winnipeg's sake that they may figure out a way for him to sign an extension. That's another player we're going to be watching throughout this year to see what the future holds. At this point, there's really nothing new to report there. We know the last we had heard he was seriously considering wanting a fresh start, but that was at the end of last season. Throughout the offseason, there's lots of speculation he could be moved because of his lack of a willingness to sign an extension. But the problem is they had to be careful, because if you do move him, you're going to get back another player who you can plug right into that top six and keep chugging, and that's probably more likely not. And they're off to such a good start, and you want to win now, it's tough. It's a really tough situation they're in. So at the very least, I think that they're going to try their best to convince him to stay, and we'll see how that works out. Now, of course, we know the NHL is going to have the Four Nation Face-Off tournament coming up here later this season. We know the roster deadline is about 30 days away, so I will be putting out some videos here next couple of days for my opinion on the roster projections for those teams, so stay tuned for that. And, of course, we know the NHL players are heading to the Olympics in 2026. Well, according to one of the top agents in hockey, Alan Walsh, he's hearing reports, and I've seen this elsewhere as well, that the IIHF and the Olympic Committee is considering having a different version, not just your team game of hockey that we know it as today, but having a 3-on-3 hockey aspect in the 2026 Olympics as well. So, that would be, look at how much fun 3-on-3 overtime is to watch. We don't really know a lot of specifics on how it would work. I would suspect that it'd be the same concept, because the Olympics are all about representing your nation and, best on best, country against country. I would think that the teams that are going to be in the traditional hockey tournament, would they then maybe participate in this as well and just have smaller rosters and have, and play the 3-on-3 game? Like, you wouldn't think it'd be, I guess there could be some other players that maybe are known, like for NHL overtime, for example, of being really good at that aspect of the game and maybe not be in a roster, but a lot of those guys are going to be on the Olympic rosters already, you would think, right? So I'm not sure how it's going to work, but it could be fun, because just think about how much fun we have watching NHL overtime. It can be really exciting. I know the All-Star game, isn't, for some people at least, it's not super exciting and fun. But at the same time, you do get a lot of challenging situations in those games, and it can be high impact hockey. The back and forth and the high danger chances, and the goalies play a big role, and it's a lot of ice, right? So, like, to have a 3-on-3 game, if they wanted to do that, would be interesting. And now, I guess the other aspect of it as well is, during the regular Olympic tournament, like, would they want the same players? Because obviously you want to make sure because 3-on-3 is going to be quite exhausting, right? I don't know how long the games would be. We don't know any details, but I'm just wondering, would those federations want those players that are doing the traditional 5-on-5 game, like, to also play there too? But they would be the best qualified. So hard to say how it's all going to work out. But the fact that it's being considered is a really cool concept, and I'd certainly be quite I'd be pro for having it happen. So we'll see if we can get more details on that, and hopefully we do see something work out here. And here's a really interesting fact that I did not know until today. But of course, being Monday, the NHL announces 3 stars of the week. So the 3 stars of the week won't come as a huge surprise. We got Alex Ovechkin, Marty Necas, and Sidney Crosby. Okay. Now, of course, we know Ovi and Sid have been rivals forever, right? They've both been in the NHL now for a really long time. And this is actually the first time ever that Ovi and Sid have been named to the 3 stars of the week at the same time. Is that not mind-blasting here to listen to that? I had no idea. You'd think through their illustrious history, because I mean, of course I follow the game super closely, but I mean, the stars of the week is not something I really have, ingrained in my memory here for who's, won every single week. That's just, think about how many weeks in a season and over so many years. Like, you're not going to remember all that. If somebody would have said to me, trivia question, has Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin ever been named to the NHL 3 stars of the week at the same time? I would have said, it's gotta have happened, considering how long they've both played and how successful they've both been. It had to have happened, right? The answer was no, not until now. So that's a crazy NHL interesting stat for you on this Monday. Now, as I mentioned as well, lots of NHL trade talk around the league, some interesting tidbits. One, this kind of touches on what we talked yesterday, but now we get more information coming from a different source. Frank Saravalli, on his latest podcast, talking about the Seattle Kraken. We talked a bit about how there's been a Montreal media kind of clamoring, suggesting they should go after Yanni Gourde, who's a likely trade candidate for the Seattle Kraken. A lot of Montreal people feel he'd be a good fit there, so there's been a lot of speculation that he may be a target for them. Well, Frank Saravalli didn't necessarily link them to specific teams, but talking about how the Seattle Kraken, at this point, obviously have had a bad stretch of games. They're obviously got some guys that are pending unrestricted free agents, and they also have, I think, some younger players that I think, like Shane Wright, they'd really like to get him a bigger role. I think they need to for him and his development to really see what kind of player he could become. They need to get him into a consistent top 6 role, and there's certainly a few veterans kind of blocking that from happening. So guys like Yanni Gourde, and well, not to say that these guys are always in the top 6, but they need to get Wright's role increased for sure. But guys like Yanni Gourde and Brandon Tanev are expected. He mentioned over the course of the next few weeks, so sometime probably throughout the month of November, he thinks the odds of them being traded are pretty high. So, of course, as like I said, as we've talked about, a lot of the other connections around Gourde, it's been more about speculation that he's a pending UFA, he's on a team that's struggling, and he's 32 years old, making $5 million, so he's going to probably have to take less money on his next deal. And clearly, it makes sense that he'd be a trade candidate. So obviously, in the case of that, it's easy to say him being a possible guy that gets moved, but now Saravalli's linking it as well. So just kind of shows that there's a little bit more, connected people who think it's going to happen, but he did not specifically say to Montreal. Now, speaking of Montreal, though, there was an article from the Hockey News from Islanders writer Stefan Rosner suggesting that if Arber Xhekaj becomes available, that the Islanders should be all over it and maybe try to kind of mimic the Romanov deal where they made at the draft a couple of years back, where the Habs moved Romanov. He ended up going to the Islanders. They got a first-round pick, which was then flipped to Chicago for Kirby Dach. So not necessarily a 3-team deal, not necessarily a first-round pick, but obviously we know Xhekaj has been kind of in and out of the doghouse with Marty St. Louis. We also don't know. I think for the first time, there's some more pressure on Marty St. Louis. I know Elliot Friedman talked about this on his latest podcast as well, saying, for the first time during his coaching tenure with Montreal, there's actually a little bit of pressure. There's some external more external than internal expectations to do better this year, and so far it hasn't happened. So I think for some they're starting to wonder, is Marty St. Louis the right coach to take this team to the next level? Obviously, he helped a few things get unlocked. He was really good for Cole Caulfield, but overall we haven't really seen a big improvement in defensively at all as a team, and they just haven't taken that step that a lot of people were hoping for. So with Xhekaj and all the young defensemen on this team, there's been a lot of speculation about Arber Xhekaj, and it really boils down to the fact that he's had his struggles defensively. Marty St. Louis sat him out, so he's been a healthy scratch a few times. He's been limited on his ice time a few times. Marty St. Louis has been kind of quick to kind of call him out during his press conferences a little bit as well. So it just kind of leaves a lot of people wondering, maybe he's not going to be the long future in Montreal that some people think. and maybe he does become a trade piece. They have lots of young defensemen that could possibly take his spot. And the Islanders article from the Hockey News just says if he were be available, that they should absolutely jump in all over it. We know they've had some issues with their defense core getting banged up this year, which is also not really new. They've had this happen before. So with all the injuries they've had, and the fact they got Romanov out of Montreal, Romanov they kind of use as a template, saying that he was not necessarily exactly like Xhekaj, but the fact that he liked to throw the big hits, and he was a very physical defenseman. Before he was drafted, he had a little bit more offensive upside, but had kind of struggled, developing and showing that in the NHL, and wondering if, Xhekaj could come in as a third pair left shot guy that would be, a big hit with the Islanders, to throw that big hit, throw the physicality, and drop the gloves when need be and all that stuff. So, yeah, like I said before, if ever Xhekaj is available, he's one of those guys that I think a lot of teams would like to have, even if they look at him as a project, because, he was an older undrafted kid. He's got the size. He's got the physicality. He can fight, but he's got to work on his defensive game to stay in the NHL. And that's what they need to see the improvements in the development on. So we'll see. But yeah, absolutely. Should the Islanders go after Xhekaj if he's available? I agree wholeheartedly with the article. I just don't know what they're going to offer. And should they be trading another first round pick? No, probably not. So the Islanders are in a tough spot. I really think the Isles they definitely need a change in management, and they need a retool in the worst way. And Xhekaj would be good for them. We're not at a point where Montreal is definitely going to move him. And as Darren Dreger said before, if ever Xhekaj is known to be available by the Montreal Canadiens, there's going to probably be a whole bunch of teams that are interested, because he is just kind of like almost like a unicorn kind of player. It's not something that you find very often. Now, staying with Montreal, though, we've heard a lot about the forward with edge from Elliot Friedman and other NHL insiders. A new article that I came across looking at some other options. And one of the names that was brought up was former Hab Nick Delorier, who's currently with the Flyers, as maybe being an option for them to reacquire him. Sammy Blais with the St. Louis Blues was also mentioned. Delorier is making $1.75 million and still has another year, so he's very much an overpaid player with edge. The Flyers may not mind moving off that contract. At the same time, he's a good fit there to a certain degree, but with the changeover in their team in the last couple of years, I could see them maybe be willing to move off of that contract for sure. So obviously Delorier's, he's a French Canadian player, so certainly he's played there before. He would be the kind of player that we talked about. Now, Yanni Gourde's completely different. He plays with edge too, but it's not to the same degree. Delorier is more of a fighter, whereas Gourde's more just a tenacious player to play against, right? And he's completely different. It definitely has a lot more skill, centerman, face-offs and all that. So, again, completely different, but a way different contract as well. So, lots of different options out there. Would not be shocked if Delorier was somebody they would consider. And in Buffalo, I've seen another article. We know the Sabres are contemplating multiple things. We've heard lots of reports from various insiders that Kevin Adams is having lots of conversations. They're off to a slow start this year, and they're considering many different things. They'd like another defenseman. Ideally, a top four right shot guy would be perfect, is what they're looking for. And maybe they're not opposed to a shakeup of some degree in the forward group as well. And we've heard about Chicago really wanting another centerman to play behind Connor Bedard. And I've seen some suggesting the connection here, maybe Dylan Cousins to Chicago. Now, Cousins is a player that I wouldn't have thought Buffalo would even consider trading a while back, but he has had his fair shares of inconsistency and struggles. And I know I think at one point really signed him and hoped that he would be their number two center, and hasn't quite worked out to be that way, that he's the best fit there. So certainly, Chicago needs a center for the same kind of role. He's making $7.1 million, still has like 3 or 4 years left on his contract. So, for Chicago, if he's not working out in Buffalo, is this a risky trade? With the talent this kid has and what we've seen in the past, I would think that it could be a case of, maybe buying a player when he's, kind of low value. So it might not work out well for Buffalo because they might have a hard time getting a big return. But, they were suggesting that maybe Chicago would move a player like a Connor Murphy, who could be that top four defenseman that they're looking for. They'd have to throw in more than just Murphy, but he could be a good starting point to help secure that blue line. Maybe they throw in another younger player prospect draft pick. I don't know what else it would be. There would have to be more than that, obviously, to make the deal make sense at all for Buffalo. We've heard the name Jack Quinn, too. Quinn has obviously battled a lot of injuries the last couple of years. And certainly, I know I've seen one article suggesting that maybe the Senators should look into acquiring Jack Quinn. I'm not sure the Sabres are really all that crazy about making a bunch of deals within the division, but obviously Jack Quinn, I think the only connection really to Ottawa is the fact that he's an Ottawa kid, played his junior hockey with the 67s, but I mean, really, I don't know that he's a player that Ottawa would have an interest in. I mean, he's obviously a young, talented player who's had his fair share of injuries and struggles, and I'm not sure where he would fit in Ottawa's lineup right now, to be honest, but I guess we'll see about that. But as far as whether or not Jack Quinn could be available, I would not be shocked by it in the least. And as far as Cousins goes, I think they'd be cautious but willing to listen would be kind of how I would describe that. And with the right deal, I mean, I don't know what I've been mentioning about the speculated piece. Like I said, it's just speculation. I think a top four defenseman, like I said, and something else would have to be included to even make Buffalo go, maybe we should. But it's, I think they're going to take their time here. Cousins, I think, has the potential to be a 30-40 goal scorer and 70-80 points. I really do think he has that kind of potential. Sometimes the best deals are the ones you don't make, and maybe we'll see if he can get things turned around in Buffalo. But the Sabres are having their fair share of struggles to start the year, and there's only so much time that can go by before they do have to consider something a little bit more drastic. So time will tell, but it wouldn't be shocking if Cousins or Quinn, if they do make a big move, if they're some of the names that are involved. And I don't know how much patience there's going to be in Buffalo. I know they got a new coach, so they're not going to play the fire the coach card. I wouldn't be shocked if they play the fire the GM card. But like I said, Kevin Adams is so well liked in the long relationship with the Pegulas. I don't think he's going to be fired. I think he'd be reassigned and they'd bring in a new GM. But I'm not sure that they get through the season without a new GM being named and at least one big trade being made. Unless they get on a real heater and turn things around and don't give them any more reasons to even consider. But let me know what you think. All today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.